I didn't find out that my son told everyone I was dead through gossip. I didn't hear it whispered at a family dinner or hinted at by a neighbor. I read it in an official document that should never have existed. Mother of the groom, deceased. The words were clean. Typed. Final. Date, June 22nd. Signature, my son's. Amount at the bottom of the page, $48,000. I was sitting at my kitchen table. The refrigerator hummed behind me. My coffee was still warm in my hands. I was alive. Breathing. Reading my own death as if it were a settled fact. Not missing. Not estranged. Not ill. Dead. I read the line again, slower this time, waiting for reality to correct itself. It didn't. The ink stayed sharp. His signature didn't blur. The number didn't change. That was the moment I understood something cold and final. My son hadn't misspoken. He hadn't made a mistake. He had erased me on purpose, officially, quietly, and in writing. How do you survive the moment you realize your own child has buried you while you're still alive? If you want to hear my story until the end, subscribe to this channel. Because what they did next broke my heart. And what happened after that destroyed everything they built. I am not a dramatic woman. I never learned how to be loud about my sacrifices. I learned how to be useful. I was the name on the mortgage when my husband died and the bank needed certainty. I was the quiet signature when my son needed help starting over. I was the phone call that fixed things before they became problems, and the silence that followed when fixing them cost me something. I worked for 43 years. I paid off my house early. I kept my accounts clean, my documents labeled, my promises kept. I believed that stability was a form of love. I believed that if I made myself dependable enough, I would always have a place. That was my mistake. My son grew up watching me carry weight without complaint. He learned that I would step in before things fell apart. Somewhere along the way, he stopped seeing that as care and started seeing it as infrastructure, something solid, invisible, and taken for granted. His fiancée noticed it faster than he did. She was polite to my face. Careful. Always warm enough to be unimpeachable. But there was calculation in her kindness, a way of listening that felt less like curiosity and more like inventory. She remembered what I owned. She remembered what I paid for. She remembered what I never said no to. Together, they were efficient. When they needed help, I was family. When they needed money, I was mom. When they needed space, I was suddenly strong and independent and better off not being involved. Useful people are rarely consulted. They are accessed. I see that clearly now. I didn't become inconvenient because I was difficult. I became inconvenient because I was still alive, still legally present, still able to sign my name and say no. I was a living variable in a plan that required certainty. A dead mother is simple. She doesn't ask questions. She doesn't read documents carefully. She doesn't arrive uninvited. She exists only as a photograph on a table and a line in a program, honored, silent, and harmless. I had spent my whole life making things easier for the people I loved. I never imagined that one day, the easiest solution would be to remove me entirely. At the time, I still believed in misunderstandings. I still believed in benefit of the doubt. I told myself that love doesn't vanish overnight, that families don't erase their own. I hadn't yet accepted the truth. They didn't stop loving me. They stopped needing me alive. And once I understood that, everything that followed began to make sense. The first crack didn't come with shouting or anger. It came dressed as responsibility. It was an ordinary afternoon. The kind you forget the moment it ends. Sunlight slipped through the curtains and settled on the arms of the sofa. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, the same sound it had made for years. Nothing warned me that this moment would follow me for the rest of my life. My son sat across from me, relaxed, almost bored. He picked up his coffee, set it down again, and then said it, as if he were commenting on the weather. "Mom, if something ever happens to you, we should probably have the paperwork ready." He didn't look at me. His eyes were fixed on the coffee table, on a shallow scratch in the wood from when he was younger. His voice was calm, even gentle. There was no tremor in it. No concern. Just certainty. I laughed, softly, because that is what mothers do when something feels wrong but hasn't yet earned its name. "I'm not planning on dying," I said. "I'm healthy. You know that." He nodded immediately. Too immediately. "I know," he said. "Of course. It's just being prepared. You always taught me that." And that was how the moment slipped past me. Preparation had always been my virtue. I kept files neat. I paid bills early. I believed order was kindness. Hearing my own values reflected back at me felt disorienting, like seeing your handwriting on a letter you don't remember writing. "What paperwork?" I asked. "Wills, medical directives, emergency contacts, all reasonable things. All things I already had." He waved his hand, dismissive, as if details were unnecessary. "Just the basics. Nothing urgent." Nothing urgent, and yet he had rehearsed it. Nothing urgent, and yet it had been waiting on his tongue. When he left that day, I stood in the doorway longer than usual, watching his car disappear. I felt a faint tightness in my chest, the kind you ignore because it isn't pain, just pressure. The house felt quieter after he was gone, as if something had been removed without permission. That evening, I opened the drawer where I kept my documents. I didn't intend to change anything. I just needed to see them. My birth certificate. The deed to my house. Insurance papers. My name printed cleanly and clearly, again and again. Still here, I told myself. Still real. But his sentence had already settled into me. "If something ever happens to you." It echoed while I washed dishes. While I folded laundry. While I lay awake listening to the house breathe around me. It didn't sound like worry. It sounded like planning. Concern asks questions. Concern listens. Concern looks you in the eye. This had been different. Over the next few weeks, small things shifted. He called less. When he did, the conversations were efficient, stripped of warmth. He stopped asking about my plans. When I mentioned future trips or ideas, he smiled vaguely, the way you do when indulging a thought that doesn't matter. At family gatherings, he spoke about the future as if I were not part of it. Holidays became complicated. Decisions were already made by the time I heard about them. I told myself I was imagining things. Women my age are taught to doubt their instincts first. To smooth discomfort. To choose harmony over clarity. So I stayed silent. I didn't confront him. I didn't ask follow-up questions. I didn't tell anyone how uneasy I felt. I folded that unease away and labeled it imagination. Now I understand. That conversation wasn't about my well-being. It wasn't about love or care or protection. It was administrative. He wasn't wondering if I would die. He was preparing for when I no longer existed, at least on paper. The crack was small. Almost polite. But once it appeared, the structure was already failing. And I was still standing inside it, believing the walls would hold. It didn't happen all at once. No announcement. No confrontation. Just a slow, deliberate fading. They stopped asking my opinion first. Small things at the beginning. Dates. Seating. Colors. Decisions I would normally have been part of arrived already finished, wrapped in cheerful certainty. "We already handled it," my son would say. Or, "It's easier this way." Easier for whom was never discussed. Then they stopped mentioning my name. At family gatherings, conversations moved smoothly around me, as if I were furniture. Present, useful once, now mostly decorative. People spoke about the wedding in future-perfect language, what will be, what has been decided, and my absence was quietly assumed. I noticed how my phone stopped ringing. At first I told myself it was normal. They were busy. Weddings are consuming. Young people focus forward. That is what parents are supposed to accept. But silence has a texture when it is intentional. Weeks passed. Then months. Invitations arrived addressed to family, never directly to me. Updates came secondhand, filtered, incomplete. When I asked questions, the answers were brief and strangely formal, as if I were an external party requesting information. One afternoon I realized something that made my hands go cold. They weren't just excluding me from plans. They were editing me out of language. I became handled. Taken care of. Not something to worry about. I was still alive, still paying my bills, still waking up every morning in my own house, yet in their words, I had already slipped into the past tense. When relatives asked why I hadn't been involved, my son smiled politely. "Mom doesn't like the stress," he said. "She wants us to handle it." That wasn't true. But it sounded reasonable. And that was the point. Reasonable lies are the hardest to fight. They don't provoke defense. They invite agreement. People nod and move on, relieved not to question further. I felt myself shrinking in the eyes of others without ever being asked to speak. The most painful part wasn't the exclusion itself. It was the calmness with which it was done. No cruelty. No anger. Just quiet administrative removal, as if my presence were an inconvenience that required gentle correction. I began to understand something unsettling. They were practicing life without me. Not emotionally. Logistically. My opinions were unnecessary. My consent was irrelevant. My existence complicated things that worked better if I were assumed gone. At night, I sat alone with the same mug I had used for years, the rim worn thin by habit. The house sounded the same. The walls hadn't changed. But something fundamental had shifted. I wasn't being pushed out. I was being replaced by a version of me that could not object. A memory. A concept. A role emptied of authority. They didn't need me to disappear physically. They just needed me silent. And I was almost there, still breathing, still alive, already erased. The next blow didn't come from a bank or a lawyer. It came from my own laptop, in the quiet of my house, on an evening when the rain tapped softly at the kitchen window. I had been trying not to look. Trying to be respectful of their space. But the silence around the wedding had become its own kind of noise, and I needed one clear fact: time, place, anything I could hold in my hands. So I opened the wedding website. It loaded slowly, as if it were reluctant to show me what was waiting. There was a pale background, a smiling photo of them, and a menu of pages: our story. Registry. Travel. Ceremony. My finger hovered over ceremony for a moment. I felt foolish, like a stranger sneaking a glance through a window. Then I clicked. A program appeared on the screen, laid out like something meant to be printed and handed to guests. It listed the processional, the music, the vows. Neat little headings. Clean lines. And then I saw it. In loving memory of the groom's mother. I didn't understand at first. My mind refused the words the way the body refuses cold water. I read it again, slower, as if pronunciation might change the meaning. In loving memory. Of me. Below the line was a small plan for the front row. A reserved chair. A candle. White flowers arranged beside it, as if my absence were a tender detail, not a lie. The chair even had a note: "Please leave this seat open." As though my body were the only thing missing. My face went hot. Not with grief, with humiliation so sharp it felt physical. They weren't simply leaving me out. They had made my erasure part of the decor. A tasteful little sadness to soften the room. I looked around my kitchen, as if someone might be watching me read it. The same table. The same worn mug. The same lavender dish soap by the sink. Ordinary life, still happening, while somewhere else my memory was being curated. I clicked back and scrolled, hunting for a correction, an explanation, a footnote that would turn this into a misunderstanding. There was nothing. Just that sentence, sitting there calmly, as final as a gravestone. I stared at the screen until my eyes ached. I could hear my own breathing, steady, present, arguing with the words that claimed I was gone. For a moment I thought, absurdly, of calling my son right then, of saying, "Hello. It's me. Still alive." But I already knew what I would get, a smooth voice, a practiced explanation, a way to make me sound confused. Instead, I checked the other pages. The travel section listed hotels and shuttle times. The registry page was bright with expensive choices, things I would never buy for myself. And on the FAQ page, there was a line that made my stomach drop. Please be mindful of the family during this sensitive time. Sensitive time. As if I had died recently. As if mourning were part of the dress code. My hands began to shake, and I hated that they could reach into my body from miles away and make me tremble. I placed my palms flat on the table until the shaking slowed. Then I did something I had never done before. I took a screenshot. I saved it with the date and the file name. I emailed it to myself. I printed it out, the paper warm as it slid from the printer. I wrote the time in pen at the top, 8:41 p.m., because I suddenly understood how important minutes can become. I sat there with that page in front of me, and a strange thought rose up, calm and terrifying. If they were willing to announce my death to guests, then they had already announced it to people who mattered more than guests. Banks. Offices. Companies. Someone had accepted this. I pictured clerks stamping forms, planners nodding, relatives lowering their voices, each one participating without asking in my disappearance. I opened my phone and scrolled to a cousin I trusted, someone who had always been kind but not nosy. My thumb hovered over her name. I imagined her voice going quiet. I imagined her saying, "Oh honey, we thought you knew." And then I realized I was afraid to make the call. Not because I feared the truth. Because I feared the pity. Because I could already see their faces, people who had eaten at my table, who had thanked me for birthday gifts, looking at me like a ghost that refused to stay buried. I set the phone down. I folded the printed page once, then twice, like a letter I didn't want to send. I slid it into a folder with my other important papers. My death, filed among the documents of my life. That was when I heard my son's calm voice from months earlier, clear as if he were sitting beside me. "If something ever happens to you." He had been rehearsing this. And now the rehearsal was public. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I simply sat very still, listening to the rain, and watched something inside me shift from disbelief into focus. Because if they could create a memorial for me while I was alive, then they could create much worse. The truth did not arrive as a single revelation. It came piece by piece, each confirmation tightening around the last. The morning after I found the wedding program, I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad and my phone. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I had slept very little, but my mind felt sharp, almost unnaturally calm. Shock does that sometimes. It clears space. I started with the bank. I had been with them for over 20 years. Same branch. Same type of account. They knew my handwriting. I thought that would matter. The woman who answered sounded careful, the way people do when they already believe they are speaking to someone else. "I just need to confirm something," I said. Has there been any recent activity or correspondence regarding my account status? There was a pause. I heard keys. A breath held a second too long. Yes, she said. We received notification. Notification of what? I asked. Of your passing, she replied, gently. I'm very sorry. The word landed heavily, like a stamp. Dead. Not confused. Not mistaken. Dead. I thanked her. I don't know why. Old habits don't die easily, even when you've been declared dead yourself. When I hung up, I didn't cry. I stared at the wall across from me and waited for denial to arrive. It didn't. Something inside me had already crossed a line it couldn't return from. I made more calls. The wedding planner confirmed it immediately. No hesitation. Yes, she said, we were informed the groom's mother passed earlier this year. That's why the memorial candle was added. Added. As if grief were a design choice. A distant aunt admitted she had been told not to reach out because it might upset me, the dead woman. A family friend lowered his voice and said, we assumed you knew. Everyone was told. Everyone. My son hadn't whispered this lie. He had distributed it. I went back to the document that started it all. The one with his signature. The one with the $48,000 at the bottom. I read it slowly now, understanding the full shape of what I was looking at. That money hadn't been symbolic. It hadn't been theoretical. It had moved. Approved expenses. Authorized transfers. Decisions made under the assumption that I could no longer object. My absence hadn't been an accident. It had been necessary. That was when the final truth settled into me. This wasn't personal cruelty. It was logistical efficiency. A living mother complicates things. She asks questions. She wants explanations. She notices numbers. She shows up. A dead mother is simple. She cannot refuse. She cannot testify. She cannot arrive. I realized then how carefully this had been done. No dramatic announcement. No obituary. Just enough silence, repeated often enough, to make the lie believable. People had filled in the rest themselves. Silence is persuasive. Politeness is dangerous. I thought of every time I had chosen not to insist. Every moment I had stepped back to keep the peace. I had trained them all to accept my absence without question. What I felt then was not rage. It was clarity. My son had not lost me. He had replaced me. And once I understood that, I stopped asking why. Because the truth was simple, cold, and finally undeniable. He told everyone I was dead because it was easier than dealing with me alive. And now that I knew, the next move was mine. After the last call ended, I didn't move for a long time. The house was still, wrapped in that thin morning light that makes everything look honest. My notebook lay open in front of me, names and times written neatly, like evidence waiting to be understood. I realized something then that surprised me with its calmness. I wasn't panicking. There was no urge to scream, no rush to call him and demand explanations. Those reactions belonged to the woman I had been, the one who still believed she could talk her way back into being seen. That woman was gone. In her place was someone quieter, steadier, and strangely unafraid. If my son had already killed me with words, then there was nothing left for him to threaten. He had taken the worst thing he could do and already done it. Everything after that was just logistics. I stood up and lit a candle on the kitchen counter. Not out of ritual, not out of grief. I simply needed a small, steady flame to look at while my thoughts settled. The match flared, then softened, the way resolve does when it finally finds oxygen. I thought about the woman I had been for decades. The one who smoothed tensions. The one who paid quietly. The one who accepted exclusion as maturity. I had confused silence with strength for a very long time. That silence had protected everyone but me. I looked again at the screenshot of the wedding program. At the printed page folded carefully in my folder. At the numbers that no longer felt abstract. This wasn't about hurt feelings or family drama. It was about authority. About consent. About my life being treated as a completed chapter while I was still writing it. Something inside me aligned. I understood that I didn't need to convince anyone of my worth. I didn't need to beg for inclusion or argue my way back into existence. All I needed to do was appear, legally, physically, undeniably. Alive. The clarity was almost gentle. It didn't rush me. It didn't shout. It simply laid out the next step as if it had always been waiting. I picked up the phone again, this time with intention. Not to confront. Not to explain. Not to ask for mercy. But to make myself present in places where presence mattered. In systems. In records. In rooms that had already decided I was gone. The candle burned steadily beside me, wax pooling quietly at its base. I watched it and felt something loosen in my chest, something that had been tight for years. This was no longer about what they had done to me. It was about what I was about to do for myself. And for the first time since I read my own death in black ink, I felt completely alive. I did not make the call immediately. I waited until morning, until the light settled into the kitchen the way it always had. Panic makes poor witnesses. I wanted my voice steady, my facts clean. I sat at the same table where I had paid bills and written birthday cards for decades. The mug in my hands had a small chip on the rim. The candle from the night before had burned itself down to a shallow pool of wax. I left it there. Evidence that something had already ended. When the lawyer answered, I listened to his greeting for a moment before speaking. There was confidence in it. Structure. The sound of someone who believed in records and consequences. I need to say one sentence, I told him. And I need you to take it seriously. He paused. Go ahead. My son has informed multiple people and institutions that I am dead, I said. I am alive. And I need to re-enter my own life. There was silence on the line. Not shock. Calculation. Do you have documentation? He asked. Yes, I said. More than enough. We scheduled a meeting for that afternoon. Until then, I gathered what I had. Not frantically. Methodically. Deeds. Account statements. Screenshots. Emails. Notes with dates written clearly in the margins. I had always kept my papers in order. I hadn't known they would one day defend me. At his office, I laid everything out on the table between us. I didn't speculate about motives. I didn't describe emotions. I let the ink speak. Ink doesn't lie. It only reveals. He read quietly. His jaw tightened just slightly, enough to confirm what I already understood. This is not a misunderstanding, he said. This is misrepresentation. Hearing it named felt grounding. We talked through next steps. Immediate ones. Accounts to freeze. Authorizations to revoke. Notifications to issue. Each action was procedural, almost dull on its own. Together, they formed something immovable. I signed where he indicated. My hand did not shake. For years, I had believed that legal boundaries were acts of aggression, that involving professionals meant admitting failure as a family. Sitting there, pen in hand, I finally understood how wrong I had been. This was not revenge. It was correction. Before I left, he asked a final question. Do you want this handled quietly, he said, or in a way that makes your status unmistakable? I didn't answer right away. I thought of the printed program. The empty chair. The candle meant to stand in for my body. Unmistakable, I said. I didn't need to explain when or where. He understood. By the time I drove home, letters were already being prepared. Accounts were flagged. Systems that had moved smoothly without me began to resist. My absence, once convenient, had become a problem. I put the kettle on when I got home. The ordinary sounds of the house returned, water heating, pipes ticking. I sat back down at the table and waited. I had not confronted my son. I had not asked for explanations. I had not demanded apologies. I had done something far more final. I had reasserted my existence. And once that happens, everything built on your absence begins to collapse on its own. I did not tell anyone I was coming. There was no announcement, no warning call, no message asking whether it was appropriate. For years I had asked permission to be included. That morning, I dressed as if I were going to church, simple navy dress, pearl earrings, the scarf my sister gave me long ago, and I left the house without explaining myself to anyone. My lawyer met me at the edge of town. He carried a thin folder and the calm expression of a man who had seen uglier truths than mine. We drove the last few miles in silence. I watched the trees blur past the window and felt my heartbeat settle into a steady rhythm. Not courage exactly. Something cleaner. Decision. The venue sat on a hill with white fencing and tidy hedges. Cars filled the lot. Laughter rose in small bursts. From the outside it looked like a perfect day, polished and innocent. I almost admired how well a lie can wear formal clothing. As I stepped from the car, I heard music through the open doors, soft strings, practiced tenderness. My shoes crunched on gravel. Each sound felt loud to me, like punctuation. We walked in together. Heads turned before faces recognized me. Confusion moved across the room like wind across grass. I saw a cousin's hand freeze halfway to her mouth. I saw a friend of the family blink hard, as if trying to correct her vision. Someone whispered, "No," and then fell silent, afraid to finish the sentence. And there it was at the front, an empty chair, draped neatly, a candle glowing beside it, white flowers arranged as though my absence were a gentle tragedy. A small placard read, "In loving memory." My replacement had been staged with care. I stopped just inside the doorway and let myself look at it. Not in pain, no, the pain had already passed through me at home, alone. What I felt then was humiliation, sharp and cold, and beneath it a steady clarity. They had built this moment on the certainty that I would not appear. My son turned when the murmur reached him. The color drained from his face, not with sorrow but with the sudden collapse of calculation. His fiancée's smile held for a second too long, brittle as sugar glass, and then cracked. Their eyes moved to the folder in my lawyer's hands, and I watched them understand, in real time, that their story had lost its only witness. I did not shout. I did not march forward like a storm. I simply stood there, alive, in my own body, in my own name. The officiant faltered. The planner hurried over, whispering. A groomsman shifted as if to block me, then thought better of it. Someone near the front reached toward the memorial candle and, in a quick embarrassed motion, snuffed it out. The tiny curl of smoke rose straight up, like a confession. My lawyer spoke quietly to the coordinator. Papers changed hands. A phone was pulled out. Words like misrepresentation, identity, and hold the ceremony traveled in low voices, heavier than any accusation I could have thrown. The music stopped. Not with drama. With procedure. My son took one step toward me. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. There was no apology prepared for a mother who wasn't supposed to exist. Every explanation required me to be absent. Every excuse depended on my silence. "I'm alive," I said. That was all. 2 words that undid months of planning. I walked past the empty chair and chose a seat that had not been reserved for me, because no one expected me to claim space. I sat, folded my hands in my lap, and looked straight ahead. Alive. Present. Unignorable. Behind me, the doors stayed open, letting in a draft that smelled of cut grass and perfume. I could hear my own breathing, ordinary, proving I wasn't a rumor. A child in the second row asked, too loud, "Who is that?" and his mother hushed him with a frantic hand. My son finally found his voice. "Mom, what are you doing here?" I looked at him the way I used to when he came home late, waiting to see if truth would arrive on its own. "I'm correcting a mistake," I said. His fiancée stepped forward, palms lifted like she could smooth the air. "This isn't the time," she whispered, eyes darting toward the guests. "Please. We can talk after." After. That word had kept me quiet for years. My lawyer spoke again to the coordinator. I watched her read, then stiffen. Her professional smile fell away. She turned to the officiant and said, loud enough for the first rows, "We need to pause." My son tried once more, softer now. "Can we step outside?" "No," I said. "I've been outside this whole time." A few guests stood for a better view, then pretended they hadn't. Phones rose, then lowered. The planner approached me, hands trembling. "Ma'am, are you all right?" "I'm fine," I answered. "I'm just alive." And in that quiet, no scene, no shouting, only my presence, their carefully arranged day began to unravel. The room did not explode. It didn't need to. It simply changed temperature. When a wedding stops, everyone pretends it hasn't, at first. The officiant cleared his throat. The string music never restarted. The planner stood with her clipboard pressed to her chest as if it could protect her. Guests shifted in their seats, then began rising in cautious clusters, hungry for an explanation they did not want to ask for directly. My lawyer spoke with the venue manager, then with the planner, then with someone from the bank on speakerphone. I heard my name said out loud, fully and correctly, the way it should have been said for months. I watched faces register the new reality. The mother of the groom was not a memory. She was a person standing in the aisle with paperwork. The coordinator approached my son and his fiancée. Their smiles had vanished, replaced by tight, private urgency. They tried to keep voices low, but panic makes people careless. "This is a misunderstanding," my son said, too quickly. The planner shook her head. "I need verification," she replied. "Right now." Verification. That word had teeth. Within minutes, the ceremony was officially paused. The venue staff began moving as if following a drill, checking contracts, calling supervisors, asking about liability. The planner asked for identification. I handed it over without drama. My hands didn't tremble. The truth tends to steady you. Then the practical consequences began to appear, one by one, like dominoes falling in a quiet line. Before the reception doors even opened, my son's phone began buzzing non-stop. A hotel wanted confirmation for the honeymoon suite. A car service asked who was authorized to sign. The florist needed approval for a final payment. One by one, the small machines of celebration reached for a hand to steady them and found only a lie. When my lawyer informed the vendors that a dispute had been filed, their tones changed. Polite became cautious. Cautious became firm. My sister called me from her car, voice shaking. "They told me not to bother you," she said. "They said you wouldn't want a fuss." I just listened. Any more. The payment tied to that $48,000 document was flagged. An authorization my son had presented was no longer valid once I was present to dispute it. The bank representative asked my lawyer for copies. The planner's face paled as she realized her invoices were connected to a story that had just collapsed. Guests started to leave the ceremony space and gather in the reception area, whispering over linen and champagne. I heard my name repeated in fragments. "She's alive." But they said. Why would he? A cousin who had avoided me for months approached, eyes wet with embarrassment. I thought you didn't want to be contacted, she whispered. I was told you were gone, another said, as if the lie were an accident that had simply happened to everyone. I nodded once. I wasn't, I answered. And I'm here now. My son tried to pull me aside again. His fiancée stood behind him like a shield made of satin and resentment. Mom, please, he said. Not today. I looked at him carefully. Today is exactly the day, I said. You chose it. The venue manager returned with a tight expression. We can't proceed, he announced to the planner. Not until this is resolved. Resolved. Another word that sounded simple until you lived inside it. The photographer, who had been lining up shots, lowered his camera. The band asked if they should take a break. Someone from catering demanded direction because the timeline had collapsed. Every vendor, every contract, every schedule depended on a narrative, and the narrative depended on me being absent. My lawyer stepped forward and spoke to my son and his fiancée in a low voice. I didn't catch every word, but I saw the effect. My son's shoulders dropped. His fiancée's face tightened, then went carefully blank, as if she were putting on a mask that couldn't crack again. Then the most honest consequence arrived, the room turned away from them. Not with cruelty. With discomfort. People don't like being made part of a lie, even passively. Friends who had been laughing minutes earlier now stood at a distance, uncertain where to place their loyalty. Relatives avoided my son's eyes. Someone's mother quietly gathered her purse as if leaving a bad theater performance. The wedding did not resume that day. It dissolved into conversations in hallways, calls in parking lots, hushed arguments near the bathrooms. The perfect event became an administrative problem, and the people who had planned to celebrate them began asking questions they could not answer. As I walked out with my lawyer beside me, I heard my son say behind us, voice thin with desperation, "We can fix this." He meant the schedule. The image. The inconvenience. I didn't turn around. Because the truth had already done its work. And the consequences had only begun. They came to my house 3 days later, not together at first. My son arrived alone, hands empty, eyes tired, as if exhaustion could stand in for remorse. He stood on my porch the way he used to when he'd lost his keys as a teenager, waiting for me to rescue him from the consequences. Mom, he said, voice low. Can we talk? I didn't invite him in. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. The winter air was sharp enough to keep my thoughts clear. You can talk, I said. I can listen. He swallowed. It got out of hand. People are calling. Vendors want answers. Her parents are furious. We needed the day to go smoothly. I watched him carefully. He still spoke as if the main tragedy was inconvenience. You told the bank I was dead, I said. His eyes dropped to the porch boards. It was paperwork. It was easier than explaining. Explaining what? I asked. My voice stayed even. That I didn't agree to what you were doing? That I might say no? He looked up then, desperate. I didn't think you'd show up. That was the plan, I said. Not a mistake. A plan. A car door shut behind him. His fiancée had arrived. She walked up the path with controlled steps, lipstick perfect, face carefully arranged. When she saw I was not inviting them inside, her smile twitched. We're here to apologize, she said quickly. We didn't mean to hurt you. I waited. Apologies that matter don't rush. My son tried again. If you'll just tell the lawyer to stop, we can fix this. We can move forward. We can. I held up my hand, not harshly, just enough to end the bargaining. I'm already moving forward, I said. They both froze. I told them, plainly, what would happen next. My accounts would stay protected. any access they had ever had, keys, logins, authorizations, was over. The will would be reviewed and updated. My home would remain mine, without assumptions attached to it. And from this point on, contact would be on my terms, not theirs. My son's face tightened. So you're cutting me off? I'm cutting off the version of you who needed me dead, I said. If you want a relationship, it starts with truth and time. Not pressure. His fiancée's voice sharpened. You're doing this to punish us. No, I said. I'm doing this to protect myself. I could feel my old habit rising, soften, soothe, make it easy. But I let that habit pass. I had done enough easing for a lifetime. My son's eyes filled, and for a moment I saw the boy I once carried. That was the hardest part. Love doesn't vanish. It changes shape when it meets reality. I'm sorry, he whispered. I believed he was sorry for the collapse. I didn't know if he was sorry for the lie. So I didn't forgive. Not dramatically. Not with a speech. I simply refused to hand them comfort as proof they were absolved. I hope you learn from this, I said. But you will learn without my money, my silence, or my consent. Then I opened my door and went back inside, leaving them on the porch with the only thing they couldn't control, my living, uncooperative truth. That afternoon I changed the locks. Not in anger, like replacing smoke detector batteries, quietly, because safety matters. I put the old keys in an envelope and wrote his name on it. If he ever asked, I would hand them back like relics from a life that was finished. I sent one email to my relatives. Short. Factual. I am alive. Some of you were told otherwise. Please don't act as messengers. If you have questions, ask me. When I hit send, my hands didn't shake. Truth weighs less than secrecy. That night I sat with my chipped mug and listened to the house hum. For the first time in months, the silence felt like mine. And when my son texted, "Can we start over?" I answered, "We can start with honesty." In the days after, I let some calls ring. I stopped explaining myself to people who preferred the old story. Peace isn't begged for. It's kept. By choice. Now. I live quietly now. Not hidden, just settled. Mornings begin with light through the window and the same chipped mug warming my hands. I choose where my time goes. I choose who earns my presence. The story spread, of course. Stories always do. Some people adjusted. Some preferred the version where I stayed convenient and silent. I let them keep it. I no longer correct what doesn't concern me. My son writes sometimes. Short messages. Careful ones. I answer when I can do so without shrinking myself. Distance has taught us both things love never could. I did not win anything. There was no victory parade, no moment where everyone clapped and admitted fault. Life doesn't work that way. What I gained was simpler and far more durable. I gained authorship. He told everyone I was dead. I showed up alive. That was enough. Because sometimes people bury you not with dirt, but with words. They write you out, speak for you, decide you are easier remembered than present. But the truth has one strange habit. It arrives alive. If this touched a nerve, you belong here. Subscribe to hear truths where silence becomes strength.